Screeching sirens tore through the peaceful evening, a flashing red beacon of urgency as the ambulance sped down the narrow, neatly maintained streets of the Maplewood gated community. The vehicle skidded to a stop in front of a beige two-story house, its tires barely settling before the paramedics flung open the doors, ready to rush inside. But just as one of them reached for the medical kit, a shrill voice cut through the air. "Absolutely not. You cannot park here." A woman stormed out of the neighboring house, her short platinum blonde bob bouncing with every furious step. Clad in a pastel pink cardigan and a face twisted in an expression of exaggerated outrage, Brenda Miller pointed an accusatory finger at the ambulance. "That is my parking space," she screeched, her voice carrying over the manicured lawns of the quiet neighborhood. The paramedics barely gave her a glance. They were trained professionals, lives were at stake, and they had no time for suburban drama. One of them, a tall, no-nonsense EMT named David, threw a quick response over his shoulder. "Ma'am, this is an emergency. We don't have time for." "Oh, I don't care," Brenda barked, stepping directly in front of the ambulance, arms crossed. "You need to move this vehicle right now." Inside the house, Robert Evans, a retired firefighter in his 60s, lay unconscious on the living room floor. His wife, Linda, had called 911 moments ago, her hands shaking as she pleaded for help. Now, she could see through the window her lifeline was being delayed over a parking spot. The paramedics exchanged incredulous glances. "You've got to be kidding me," muttered David. "Lady, move out of the way. A man is having a medical emergency." "I don't care who's dying," Brenda interrupted, jabbing her finger toward the curb. "This is my property. My HOA reserves this space for me. You are violating our community rules." David clenched his jaw. His partner, Megan, was already grabbing supplies and moving toward the house, determined not to waste another second. But Brenda wasn't done. "If you don't move, I'm calling the police." The words seemed to hang in the air for a moment before David let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "Go ahead," he said, shaking his head. "Call them." Brenda didn't hesitate. She whipped out her phone and dialed 911 on an ambulance. The absurdity of the situation seemed lost on her as she furiously relayed her complaint to the dispatcher. "Yes, I'd like to report an illegally parked vehicle," she huffed. "It's completely blocking my property, and they refuse to leave." A pause. "Well, it's an ambulance, but that doesn't matter. They have no right to take my space." The dispatcher, likely struggling to process what they were hearing, asked her to clarify the situation. "Yes, I live in the Maplewood gated community, and we have strict HOA regulations about parking. This ambulance is violating those rules." By now, the neighbors were peeking out from their homes, watching the spectacle unfold. It wasn't the first time Brenda had thrown a tantrum over trivial matters. She was notorious for policing people's grass height, issuing unauthorized fines, and even calling animal control on someone's dog for barking in the middle of the day. But this, calling the cops on an ambulance, this was a new level of insanity. The front door of the Evans house flung open, and Linda rushed out, her face pale with panic. "What is going on?" she gasped, her voice breaking. "My husband is inside. He needs help. Please." Brenda rolled her eyes dramatically, waving a dismissive hand at her. "They're parked in my space, Linda," she said, as if that were a reasonable explanation. "I don't make the rules, okay? But we all have to follow them. If I let this slide, then what's next? Delivery trucks? People leaving their cars wherever they please? Chaos." Linda's lips trembled as she stared at the woman who cared more about a patch of asphalt than a human life. "You're unbelievable," she whispered. Brenda sniffed. "I enforce the rules fairly." David had had enough. He brushed past Brenda and headed inside, ignoring her continued ranting. His partner had already begun administering aid to Robert, who was barely breathing. Meanwhile, Brenda remained planted in the street, phone still pressed to her ear. "Yes, officer, I am being threatened now," she exaggerated, glancing around at the growing crowd of onlookers. "Yes, they're refusing to comply with HOA regulations." "Exactly. Thank you. Please send someone right away." As she hung up, she turned to the nearest neighbor, a younger man named Ryan who had his arms crossed, shaking his head. "Can you believe this?" Brenda scoffed. "This is why rules exist, so people can't take advantage like this." Ryan let out a dry chuckle. "You just called 911 on an ambulance, Brenda." Her expression hardened. "It's about principle." "No," he said flatly. "It's about you being an insane control freak." Brenda gasped, clearly offended. But before she could retort, the sound of approaching sirens filled the air again. A police cruiser rolled up to the scene. Officer Miller, a tall, broad-shouldered man with years of experience dealing with entitled citizens, stepped out. His eyes flickered between the parked ambulance and the smug expression on Brenda's face. "Who called this in?" he asked. Brenda marched forward, head held high. "That would be me, officer," she declared triumphantly. "I need you to remove that vehicle immediately." Miller blinked. "You called 911 on an ambulance?" "Yes," she said, folding her arms. "They're violating HOA rules." Silence. The kind of silence that carries the weight of pure disbelief. Miller let out a slow exhale. "Ma'am, are you serious right now?" Brenda's confidence wavered. Well, yes. This is a gated community, and rules must be followed." Before she could finish, Ryan, still standing nearby, burst out laughing. "Dude," he said between chuckles, addressing the officer. "You have no idea how bad she is." The other neighbors murmured in agreement, nodding. Miller turned back to Brenda, his patience already wearing thin. "Let me get this straight," he said. "A man is inside having a medical emergency, and you want me to ticket or tow the vehicle saving his life because you think HOA rules overrule city ordinances?" Brenda's lips pressed into a thin line. "Well, yes." Miller stared at her for a long moment before finally speaking. "Ma'am," he said loud enough for the whole street to hear, "I've been a police officer for 15 years, and this might be the dumbest complaint I've ever responded to." The crowd erupted in laughter. Brenda's face turned beet red. But Miller wasn't done. "You're lucky I don't charge you for misusing emergency services." Brenda's mouth fell open in horror. "What? But I suggest you take a step back and let these professionals do their job, or you might be the one needing an ambulance next." The weight of public humiliation settled on Brenda's shoulders as her carefully crafted facade of HOA authority crumbled in an instant, and she had no idea the worst was yet to come. The 911 dispatcher had heard a lot of ridiculous calls in their time. People complaining about their neighbor's music, a kid dialing emergency services because his mom took away his Xbox. But this was a new one. "Ma'am, just to clarify," the dispatcher said, trying to suppress their disbelief. "You are calling 911 to report an ambulance that is currently responding to a medical emergency?" Brenda scoffed. "Yes, and it's illegally parked in my designated spot. We have very strict HOA rules here, and this kind of entitlement cannot be allowed." The dispatcher took a deep breath. "Ma'am, emergency vehicles are permitted to park wherever necessary during active emergencies. That includes ambulances, fire trucks, and police vehicles. But this is private property." Brenda snapped back, glancing around as more neighbors began stepping onto their porches, drawn by the commotion. The dispatcher's patience was wearing thin. "Ma'am, this is not a criminal offense. The ambulance is legally allowed to be there." Brenda's face twisted in frustration. "So you're refusing to send an officer?" The dispatcher hesitated. Normally, they would have ended the call right there. But given that Brenda was actively obstructing an emergency response, they flagged the situation for dispatch. A nearby patrol unit was assigned to check in. "An officer will be en route shortly," the dispatcher finally said. Brenda smirked triumphantly and ended the call. She turned back to the paramedics, who were still inside tending to Robert Evans, the actual emergency in this situation. "You all are going to regret this," she sneered. Meanwhile, Ryan, still watching from his driveway, shook his head in disbelief. "Brenda, are you seriously this crazy?" She ignored him, instead pulling out her phone and opening Facebook Live. "Hello, my fellow homeowners," she began in an artificially sweet voice. "It is Brenda Miller, HOA board member, and I am here today to expose the utter disregard for property rights happening in our beloved community." She flipped the camera to show the ambulance parked in her space. "This illegal vehicle is parked in my designated area, completely violating our HOA guidelines. And when I rightfully asked them to move, they refused. And do you know what else? They mocked me and told me that HOA rules don't matter." Ryan laughed audibly. "Oh my God, no one said that." Brenda shot him a glare but kept recording. "I have already called the police, and they are on their way. This kind of blatant rule-breaking and entitlement cannot be allowed to continue. If we let this go, what's next? Fire trucks blocking our driveways? Delivery trucks ruining our aesthetic? Absolute chaos." The comments began flooding in. "You called 911 on an ambulance? Please tell me this is a joke. HOA Karens are getting out of control. I hope this backfires on you so hard." Brenda, still oblivious, continued ranting. "It's people like this that ruin communities. People who think rules don't apply to them. But guess what? They do. And I As an elected board member, I'm here to make sure that everyone follows the law. Suddenly, another sound filled the air, the distant wail of sirens. Brenda grinned. Ah, the police are here. Finally, someone with authority will handle this situation. The patrol car pulled up, and out stepped Officer Miller, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the situation. Brenda practically skipped over to him, flashing a smug smile. Officer, thank goodness you're here. I have a serious complaint. Miller held up a hand. Ma'am, I already got the briefing. You called 911 on an ambulance. Yes, and for good reason, Brenda said, puffing up her chest. This is a private community, and that ambulance is illegally parked in my designated spot. I told them to move, and they refused. Miller blinked. You called 911 on an active emergency vehicle during a medical emergency? Yes. Miller turned his head slightly, as if he couldn't quite believe what he was hearing. Ma'am, do you realize that city ordinances allow emergency vehicles to park wherever they need to? HOA rules do not override public safety laws. Brenda's face twitched. Well, that's debatable. Miller pinched the bridge of his nose. No, it's not. Meanwhile, inside the house, David and Megan were still working on Robert Evans, stabilizing him and preparing to transport him to the hospital. Every second mattered. Miller turned to them. How's the patient? David, who was beyond done with Brenda, responded without missing a beat. Well, he would have been in the hospital by now if we hadn't been delayed by a lunatic blocking our vehicle. The crowd burst into murmurs. Brenda gasped dramatically. That is defamation. I was simply... Ma'am, Miller interrupted. Step aside. Now. Brenda's mouth fell open. Excuse me? I am an HOA official. You do not speak to me that way. Miller arched an eyebrow. You're an HOA member, not law enforcement. You don't get to interfere with an active emergency. Brenda's fingers twitched around her phone. Fine. Then issue them a citation. I want them fined for breaking our HOA's parking policy. Miller folded his arms. You want me to issue a citation to paramedics for parking while saving a man's life? Yes. Miller stared at her. The entire neighborhood stared at her. Even the dispatcher on the radio, who had been listening in, let out a tiny, barely suppressed chuckle. Ma'am, Miller finally said, I've been a cop for 15 years, and this might be the stupidest call I've ever responded to. Laughter exploded from the crowd. Brenda's face turned a deep shade of red. What? No. I am enforcing rules. Miller exhaled sharply. No. What you're doing is interfering with emergency services, which is a crime. Brenda's smugness evaporated. Oh, a crime? She stammered. Yes, ma'am. And if you keep obstructing this emergency response, I will have no choice but to escort you to the station. Brenda paled. The neighbors, now openly filming, cheered. Finally, someone shouted. About time someone put her in her place. Another voice added. Brenda whipped around, realizing that nearly half the neighborhood was watching, recording, and mocking her. This isn't fair, she shrieked. Miller shook his head. You know what else isn't fair? A man almost dying while you whine about a parking space. Brenda opened her mouth to argue, then realized there was no coming back from this. Her HOA authority meant nothing here. And worse, this was just the beginning of her downfall. Brenda stood frozen, her face a bright shade of red as Officer Miller's words echoed in the air. The entire neighborhood had gathered, their phones out, recording every second of her public humiliation. You know what else isn't fair? Miller repeated, his voice firm. A man almost dying while you whine about a parking space. Brenda's lips quivered. I was just trying to enforce the rules. Miller let out a dry chuckle. Right. Enforce the rules on emergency responders while a man was fighting for his life. That's a great look, Brenda. The neighbors burst into laughter at his sarcastic remark. Brenda clenched her fists, glaring at the crowd. Oh, you all think this is funny? She spat. This is exactly why this neighborhood is falling apart. Because no one follows the rules anymore. Ryan, who had been recording since the beginning, grinned. Brenda, the whole world is about to see how insane you are. He turned his phone toward her screen. Over 2,000 people were already watching the live stream. The comment section was brutal. This lady is a menace to society. Call an ambulance. But not for me, LOL. HOA Karens are getting worse every year. Why is she like this? Brenda's smug superiority crumbled as she stared at the real-time flood of hate comments. This is harassment, she shrieked, pointing at Ryan. Take that down immediately. Ryan shrugged. Not my fault you acted like a complete lunatic on camera. You can't record me without my permission, she screeched. Miller smirked. Actually, ma'am, he can. Public setting, no expectation of privacy. Especially when you're the one who started the live stream. Brenda blinked. The realization hit her like a truck. She had done this to herself. Ryan grinned wider. Oh, this is definitely going viral. The neighbors erupted into cheers and laughter, their collective patience with Brenda finally snapping. Finally, someone put her in her place. About time she got what she deserved. Hope the HOA sees this and kicks her out. Brenda, panicking, turned to Officer Miller with an exaggerated look of distress. Officer, I am being harassed. This is an attack on my character. Miller crossed his arms. No, this is the consequence of your own actions. Brenda let out a strangled noise. This isn't fair. Miller sighed, clearly done with her theatrics. You know what's not fair? Robert Evans almost not making it to the hospital because you were throwing a tantrum. The mention of Robert seemed to sober the crowd a little. The ambulance was gone now, racing toward the hospital, but everyone knew how serious his condition had been. Linda, Robert's wife, stepped forward, her eyes still wet from tears, but her voice was steady and full of anger. My husband could have died because of you, she said, her voice carrying pure rage. Brenda visibly flinched. I didn't mean. You didn't mean what, Brenda? Linda's voice rose. Didn't mean to delay life-saving care over a damn parking space? Didn't mean to waste police resources on your pathetic power trip? Brenda's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. You don't care about this community, and you never have, Linda continued. You just love controlling people. The neighbors murmured in agreement. Yeah, remember when she fined me for leaving my trash bin out 30 minutes past pickup? Or when she tried to ban holiday decorations because she thought they looked tacky? She reported my kids for disturbing the peace because they were playing outside. The floodgates opened, and suddenly it was Brenda versus the entire community. Officer Miller looked mildly amused. Sounds like you've made quite a reputation for yourself. Brenda's eyes darted around wildly as she realized that no one was coming to her defense. Even the other HOA board members stood silently, watching her downfall. Then, the final nail in the coffin. Mr. Peterson, the HOA president, finally stepped forward. He was an older man, usually reserved and neutral in neighborhood disputes, but today his face was stone cold. Brenda, he said simply, we need to talk. Brenda stiffened. Mr. Peterson, oh, thank goodness. You need to. He held up a hand. No, Brenda. You need to listen. You have embarrassed this community beyond repair. You have put our entire HOA in the spotlight for the worst possible reasons. Brenda froze. What are you saying? Mr. Peterson let out a long sigh. I just got off the phone with the HOA's legal team. They have advised that we hold an emergency meeting to discuss your removal from the board. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Brenda stumbled back. No, you can't. I am the only one who enforces the rules. That's the problem, Mr. Peterson said. You enforce rules that only benefit you. And now, you've become a liability. Brenda shook her head frantically. You can't do this. The HOA needs me. Ryan, still filming, chuckled. Yeah, pretty sure they don't. Mr. Peterson ignored her protests. The emergency meeting is set for tomorrow evening. I suggest you prepare. Brenda looked like she might pass out. This is a witch hunt. Miller chuckled. No, ma'am. This is accountability. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause. Brenda turned on her heel and stormed back into her house, slamming the door behind her. The moment she disappeared, the entire neighborhood burst into celebration. Ryan turned back to the camera. Well, there you have it, folks. HOA Karen finally gets what's coming to her. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more neighborhood drama. Miller let out a long sigh. I swear, HOA calls are the worst. Linda wiped her tears and finally smiled. I just hope Robert gets the care he needs. David, the paramedic who had been standing nearby, nodded. He will. And hey, looks like the neighborhood emergency is finally getting handled too. The crowd laughed again. For the first time in years, the Maplewood gated community felt like it might actually become a neighborhood worth living in. And for Brenda, this was only the beginning of the end. The HOA emergency meeting was set for 7 p.m. sharp, but by 6:30, the community center was already packed. Residents, some who had never attended an HOA meeting in their lives, crammed into every seat, eager to witness what would undoubtedly be the most satisfying downfall in Maplewood gated community history. Brenda Miller, the self-appointed dictator of the neighborhood, was finally facing judgment. The usual dullness of HOA meetings, discussing landscaping budgets and pet waste regulations, was replaced with an electrified tension. Conversations buzzed through the room, neighbors exchanging stories of the years of pettiness and harassment they had endured under Brenda's rule. Even some former residents had shown up, having heard the viral news. At 6:55, Brenda stormed in, her face pinched in an expression of indignant rage. She was dressed for battle, a stiff blazer, an oversized HOA badge pinned to her chest like a military medal, and a thick binder of documents clutched tightly in her arms. Despite everything, she still believed she could win. She still believed she was untouchable. As she stomped toward the front row, she shot glares at every neighbor who dared make eye contact. The whispers around her didn't stop. She's actually showing her face. She still thinks she's in charge. She's delusional. The HOA board sat at the long table on the raised platform at the front of the room, their expressions grim. Mr. Peterson, the HOA president, adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. All right, let's get this meeting started. Brenda shot to her feet before he could continue. Before we begin, she announced loudly, I would like to make a formal statement. Mr. Peterson sighed, but waved a hand. Fine, let's hear it. Brenda stepped forward, clutching her binder. What happened yesterday was a gross misunderstanding that has been blown out of proportion by online harassment and fake news. I was simply following HOA protocol, which, might I remind you, is what this board exists to enforce. She flipped open her binder dramatically, pulling out a printed copy of the HOA bylaws. Our official parking regulations state that personal vehicles are not permitted to park in reserved spaces without authorization. You called 911 on an ambulance, someone from the back shouted. Laughter rippled through the crowd. Brenda's eye twitched. Excuse me. I was speaking. Mr. Peterson sighed again. Brenda, we've all seen the footage. There is no misunderstanding here. Brenda slammed her binder shut. That footage was taken without my consent. I demand it be removed immediately. Ryan, who was sitting near the front, chuckled. Yeah, that's not how the internet works, sweetheart. The room erupted into laughter again. Brenda's face turned scarlet. This is harassment. I have served this community for years. I have kept it clean, organized, and free from chaos. Mr. Peterson held up a hand. Brenda, this meeting isn't about your contributions. It's about whether or not you should remain on this board. Brenda laughed, a short, high-pitched cackle. You can't remove me. I was elected. Mr. Peterson nodded. Yes. And now we will hold a vote on whether to remove you. Brenda's confidence faltered for the first time. Mr. Peterson turned to the community. Before we vote, let's go over some of the complaints that have been filed against Brenda over the years. He pulled out a stack of papers, flipping through them. In the past 5 years, Brenda has issued 127 citations to homeowners for minor infractions, including but not limited to leaving their trash cans out 5 minutes past pickup time, using the wrong shade of blue for their mailbox, having an offensively large Halloween decoration, letting their kids use sidewalk chalk, and parking in their own driveway in a way she deemed unsightly. Laughter and groans filled the room. This is ridiculous, Brenda muttered. Mr. Peterson continued. She has fined elderly residents who forgot to cut their grass due to hospital stays. She has threatened to tow cars belonging to visiting family members. And let's not forget, she has attempted to ban holiday decorations because they didn't match her vision for the neighborhood aesthetic. Because they were tacky, Brenda shouted. Mr. Peterson ignored her. But most importantly, he said, Brenda deliberately delayed a medical emergency response, and when questioned by law enforcement, she doubled down. Brenda's eyes darted across the room. Nobody was on her side. Even the board members who had once supported her refused to meet her gaze. She was losing. Mr. Peterson exhaled. All in favor of removing Brenda Miller from the HOA board, effective immediately? The room erupted in a sea of raised hands. Brenda gasped. Those opposed. Not a single hand. Brenda's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. Mr. Peterson nodded. Motion passes. Effective immediately, Brenda Miller is removed from her position on the HOA board. The room exploded into applause. Brenda looked around wildly, as if expecting someone to step in and save her. But no one did. Her power was gone. Ryan leaned toward her with a grin. Welp, there goes your reign of terror. Brenda snapped. You can't do this to me, she screeched. I am this neighborhood. Mr. Peterson gathered his papers. Brenda, you can leave now. Brenda stumbled back, shaking her head furiously. This isn't over, she hissed. I'll get a lawyer. I'll sue every single one of you. Ryan, still recording, grinned. Oh, please do. That'll just get more people to see your meltdown. Brenda's eyes twitched violently. She had never felt this powerless. She let out a furious scream, grabbed her binder, and stormed out, slamming the door so hard it rattled the windows. The room burst into cheers. Neighbors high-fived. Laughter filled the air. For the first time in years, the community felt free. Mr. Peterson rubbed his temples. Well, that was exhausting. Ryan grinned. Hey, at least we don't have to deal with her anymore. Mr. Peterson sighed. Actually, I think we might. Ryan frowned. What do you mean? Mr. Peterson pointed out the window. Brenda stood in the parking lot, phone pressed to her ear. Even from inside, they could hear her screaming into the receiver. 911. Yes, I need to report an entire neighborhood conspiring against me. Ryan burst out laughing. Oh my God, she's actually calling the cops on the HOA. And just like that, Brenda's descent into absolute madness continued. Brenda stormed through the parking lot, her rage boiling over as she barked into her phone. The neighborhood had turned against her, the HOA had kicked her out, and now she was going to make them pay. Yes, 911. I need to report a case of organized harassment, she shrieked into the receiver. The 911 operator, who had likely been briefed on Brenda's antics from the previous night, sighed audibly on the other end. Ma'am, is this about the HOA vote? Brenda's face twitched. It's about an entire community conspiring against me. Another pause. Then the operator hung up. Brenda stared at her phone in shock. Did they just hang up on me? From the community center windows, Ryan and several neighbors burst into laughter. Oh, this is better than TV, he cackled, zooming in with his phone. Brenda spun around, realizing she had an audience. Why? You're all just jealous, she screeched. Jealous because I had power and order. And now you're going to turn this place into a trashy, lawless wasteland. Nobody even acknowledged her tantrum. The neighbors were too busy celebrating. They clinked glasses, shook hands, and cheered over the downfall of the most hated woman in the neighborhood. And then, just when Brenda thought her night couldn't get any worse, a tow truck pulled into the lot. A burly driver stepped out, clipboard in hand. He looked around, confused, before spotting Brenda. You Brenda Miller? Brenda blinked. Yes? What do you want? The driver tilted his head. Yeah, I'm here to tow your car. Silence. Brenda's brain short-circuited. Why? What? She shrieked. You can't tow my car. I didn't do anything wrong. The driver checked his clipboard. Says here you have outstanding HOA fines. Brenda's breath caught. The very organization she ruled over had been stacking violations against her. What? What fines? She asked, suddenly feeling dizzy. The driver squinted at his paperwork. Multiple citations. Let's see, leaving Christmas decorations up past the HOA deadline, failing to properly trim your hedges, an unauthorized garden gnome. Ryan choked on his drink. A gnome? Oh my God. Her own rules came back to bite her. The crowd erupted into laughter. Brenda's head snapped up. No, this is a mistake. Those fines were voided. I was on the board. The tow truck driver shrugged. Yeah, well, you're not anymore. And nobody paid these, so he gestured at her car, a shiny Lexus SUV. Brenda's entire world crumbled. This is theft, she shrieked. You can't do this. The driver ignored her, hopping into his truck. With a loud clanking of chains, he secured her car and began lifting it onto the truck bed. Brenda threw herself onto the hood, screaming. No, stop. I have money. I can pay it now. The driver, completely unbothered, tapped his clipboard. Says here you have to pay through the HOA office, which, you just got kicked out of. Ryan burst out laughing so hard, he had to lean against a tree. Oh my God, this is peak irony. Neighbors whipped out their phones, capturing every second as Brenda clawed at the hood of her car, screaming, "This is a crime. Someone call the police." Officer Miller, the same officer from the ambulance incident, stepped outside, sipping a coffee. He took one look at Brenda melodramatically draped over her car, sighed, and shook his head. Ma'am, he called, walking over, I really think you should take the L and go home. Brenda twisted around, wild-eyed. You have to stop them. Miller raised an eyebrow. I don't have to do anything. The tow is legal. Brenda let out an ear-piercing screech. I'll sue. I'll have this entire neighborhood shut down. Ryan leaned toward Miller. Can you actually shut down a neighborhood? Miller smirked. Nope. More laughter. The tow truck driver honked the horn. Ma'am, you going to move? Or am I dragging this thing with you on it? Brenda froze. The realization hit her. She was powerless. Her title gone. Her authority gone. Her own car about to be gone too. Her reign of terror was officially over. With shaking hands, she peeled herself off the hood, glaring at the laughing neighbors. You'll regret this, she hissed. You'll all regret this. Ryan grinned. Oh, I doubt that. The tow truck pulled away, Brenda's precious Lexus disappearing into the night. She stood there, trembling with fury, humiliation, and disbelief. Mr. Peterson, still inside the community center, watched the whole thing unfold. He sighed, rubbing his temples. Well, that takes care of that. David, the paramedic, chuckled. You know, karma has never worked faster. The crowd cheered. First night without her in charge, and it's already the best day of the year. A small celebration broke out. Someone brought champagne. Someone else turned on music. Neighbors who had never spoken before laughed together, bonded by the shared victory. And Brenda? She stood in the empty lot, fists clenched, seething. Her entire empire had collapsed in less than 48 hours, and the entire world had seen it. Her meltdown video was already trending on social media. HOA Karen gets publicly humiliated after calling 911 on an ambulance. Entitled woman loses everything after power trip goes too far. Millions of views. Brenda stared at her phone, her own face plastered across every platform, mocked by strangers across the globe. She let out one final, furious scream before storming off into the night. And just like that, Maplewood was finally free. The next morning, the Maplewood gated community felt different. For the first time in years, there was no passive-aggressive HOA email about trivial infractions, no Brenda marching through the streets with a clipboard handing out warnings for overgrown hedges or unsightly doormats. The air felt lighter. People left their trash bins out a little longer, just because they could. Kids played on the sidewalks without fear of being fined for loitering. Some even parked in Brenda's former reserved spot, just out of pure spite. It was a new era. At the community center, the HOA board held a follow-up meeting to discuss the next steps. Mr. Peterson sat at the head of the table, looking more relaxed than he had in years. All right, he said, leaning back in his chair. Now that the tyrant is gone, we need to clean up the mess she left behind. The board members nodded. First order of business, Mr. Peterson continued. We're canceling every single petty fine she issued. Cheers erupted in the room. Ryan, who had been documenting the entire saga, smirked. Even the garden gnome fine? Especially the garden gnome fine, Mr. Peterson confirmed. More cheers. The new HOA board members, actual reasonable people, went to work repealing the worst of Brenda's ridiculous rules. Holiday decorations were no longer restricted. Sidewalk chalk was allowed. Visitor parking was no longer a Brenda-controlled nightmare. Complaints about aesthetic violations were tossed out unless they were actual issues. By noon, the neighborhood was buzzing with excitement. People actually talked to each other, celebrating their newfound freedom. Linda, still relieved that her husband, Robert, had made it through his medical emergency, smiled as she watched kids riding bikes in the cul-de-sac. Feels like a real neighborhood again, she murmured. Ryan nodded. Yeah. And the best part, he pulled out his phone, flipping it around to show the viral status of the HOA Karen videos. 10 million views. HOA Karen's meltdown is officially internet history. Linda laughed. Serves her right. Meanwhile, Brenda was nowhere to be seen. After her public meltdown, she had locked herself inside her house, refusing to come outside. But the internet wasn't letting her disappear quietly. Her ranting live streams had been clipped, edited, and turned into memes. One of the most popular was a video titled Brenda vs. The Ambulance Auto-Tuned, featuring her infamous quote, "You can't park here. I don't care who's dying," with a catchy beat behind it. Even major news stations had picked up the story, turning her into a cautionary tale of HOA power gone too far. Brenda Miller was now the most hated person in the HOA world. But karma wasn't finished with her yet. That afternoon, a moving truck was spotted outside Brenda's house. Ryan grinned as he watched from his front porch. Oh, this just keeps getting better. Brenda stormed out of her house, still looking furious. She saw the neighbors watching her, and, instead of slinking away quietly, she made one final stand. You think you've won? She shrieked. This neighborhood will fall apart without me. You need me. Someone from the crowd shouted back. No, Brenda. We really don't. Laughter erupted. Brenda's face twisted in fury, but she had no comeback. With one last huff, she climbed in her car, which she had to get back after paying all her own fines, and sped off. Ryan, always ready, filmed the entire thing. And there it is, folks. The end of the HOA Karen reign. She's finally gone. The video racked up another 1 million views within hours. Maplewood was officially free. As the dust settled, Ryan sat back, grinning at his phone screen. His video series on Brenda's downfall had taken off way beyond expectations. In the comments, people shared their own horror stories of HOA nightmares, celebrating one of the greatest Karens of all time getting exactly what she deserved. With a final smirk, Ryan hit record one last time. All right, guys, that's the saga of HOA Karen. It's been one hell of a ride, but she's finally gone for good. He leaned forward. But let's be real, we all know another HOA nightmare is lurking out there. He pointed at the camera. So, if you've ever had to deal with a power-hungry HOA Karen, drop your craziest story in the comments. And hey, if you want more epic neighborhood drama, hit that like button and subscribe. Ryan leaned back with a grin. Because trust me, there's always another Karen out there. Cut to black.